David Morrison stands in the hallway of County General Hospital at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, holding a folder that contains his daughter's test results. He's a black single father, and the weight of that fact, the weight of being the only decision-maker, the only person responsible, the only name on the emergency contact forms, sits in his chest like something physical. His daughter is 7. Her name is Eva. 3 hours ago, she complained that her head hurt. 2 hours ago, the pediatrician said it was probably nothing. 1 hour ago, the ER doctor ordered an MRI because David had stood in the examination room and said very quietly that he wasn't leaving until someone looked at her brain. The folder is still closed. David hasn't opened it yet. He knows what's inside. He can see it in the way the radiologist's eyes wouldn't meet his, in the way the ER doctor had suddenly become very formal, in the way they'd asked if there was someone he should call. There isn't. Ava's mother, Catherine, signed away her rights 3 years ago. She sends birthday money. She calls on holidays. She is not a person David can call at 11 p.m. when the world is falling apart. So David stands in this hallway, and he opens the folder. The word tumor appears in the second paragraph. It's circled, underlined. There are measurements and locations and medical terminology that David will have to learn, that no parent should ever have to learn. Cerebellum, mass, aggressive, size of a walnut. He sits down on one of the plastic chairs bolted to the wall. His hands are rough. He installs HVAC systems for commercial buildings, jobs that start before sunrise and end after most of the city has gone to bed. His hands know how to fix things, how to work with their own logic and weight and purpose. His hands do not know how to hold the fact that his daughter's brain is trying to kill her. A nurse named Patricia approaches. She's been kind, the way some people are naturally kind without performing kindness. She sits beside him without asking permission. "Do you have family nearby?" she asks. "No," David says. "Someone you can call?" "No." Patricia nods like this makes sense, like she's seen this before. Men sitting alone in hallways, responsible for everything, connected to nobody. She doesn't offer empty reassurances. Instead, she says, "The oncologist will want to see Eva in the morning. First thing, you should try to rest. There's a waiting room with recliners down the hall." David doesn't sleep. He sits beside Eva's hospital bed and watches her breathe. She's small, even for 7, and dark-skinned like him, with her mother's fine features and a kind of delicate beauty that makes strangers look at her like she's made of something breakable. He's the only person who gets to break. He's the only person who gets to be strong. He thinks about the choices that led to this moment, meeting Catherine in college, the way she'd looked at him before she looked away, the way they'd built something temporary and called it love, the divorce papers she'd signed without fighting, the way she'd chosen Gregory, someone older, someone with money, someone who could give her a life that looked like the one she'd wanted, over the family they'd made. Eva had been 4 years old. David had held her while Catherine packed her things. He'd taught himself how to do her hair, how to make it beautiful. He'd learned to cook her favorite foods. He'd rearranged his entire life around the fact that she was his responsibility, fully and completely, with no backup plan and no safety net. Now her brain had decided to kill her, and he was the only person who could sign the consent forms. By morning, he's made calls. To his supervisor at work, he won't be coming in. To the school, Ava won't be coming in. To his landlord, who he pays rent to on the 1st of every month, steady and reliable. He might need to talk about November because his checking account is about to become a medical fund. The oncologist is a woman named Dr. Reeves. She has files on her desk that are thicker than David expected. She talks about staging and protocols and chemotherapy. She talks about survival rates that are good but not great, about how the tumor's location makes surgery risky in ways that require explanation. She talks about clinical trials, about second opinions, about the importance of getting Eva to a major research hospital. David takes notes. His handwriting is precise, military grade. He's never been to college. He's worked with his hands his entire life, but he understands how to absorb information, how to listen carefully, how to make decisions under pressure. What would you do, he asks, if she was your daughter? Dr. Reeves sets down her pen. She's probably been asked this question 100 times. She probably has a professional answer prepared. But something in David's voice, maybe the absolute absence of self-pity, maybe the quiet certainty that he will do whatever needs to be done, makes her answer honestly. I'd start chemotherapy, she says. I'd do the scan in 6 weeks and see if she responds. If she does, we keep going. If she doesn't, we talk about surgery or other options. Okay, David says immediately. Okay? Dr. Reeves seems surprised by his quickness, by the absence of negotiation. You know how to do this. I don't. So okay. Chemotherapy begins on a Friday. Eva's hair starts falling out in patches, then all at once, in the shower one morning. She looks at herself in the mirror and doesn't cry. David understands that she's learned something in the 3 days since the diagnosis. Her father is carrying enough fear for both of them, so she doesn't have to carry any. David shaves his head that afternoon. When Eva sees him, she nods like this is correct, like this is the only possible response from a person who loves her. The treatment is worse than the diagnosis. David understands this as a kind of mercy. The diagnosis was fast, a shock to the system. The treatment is slow, systematic, a degradation of the body that happens in increments small enough that you almost don't notice them until you look back and realize how much has been taken. Eva is sick for days after each session. She can't keep food down. She loses weight that she didn't have to lose. She loses the ability to run, to play, to do the things that 7-year-old bodies are supposed to do. Her world shrinks to the size of the apartment, the hospital, the car ride between them. David takes her to school on good days. Most days aren't good. Most days they sit in the apartment, small, in a neighborhood that the city has decided doesn't deserve investment, where the buildings are older and the schools are underfunded and the healthcare system moves slower than it should, and they exist in a kind of holding pattern, waiting for the next scan, waiting for the chemo to work, waiting for the day when the tumor might stop being something that needs to be fought. He stops going to work completely in week 4. His supervisor, Marcus, calls him. Take unpaid leave, Marcus says. I'll hold your position. For how long? As long as you need. David doesn't ask Marcus why he's doing this. He's learned that gratitude is something men like him have to be careful about. It can look like weakness, like need, like something other than what it is. A moment of another human being deciding that your daughter matters enough to absorb the cost of your absence. The days blend together. Wake up, check Eva's temperature, make sure she takes her medications, wait to see if she can keep down breakfast, sit with her while she does schoolwork on good days, sit with her while she sleeps on bad days. Repeat. David has always been a man who moves forward. His life has been built on forward motion, the job, the overtime, the careful accumulation of money for Eva's future. But this is different. This is waiting. This is the absence of control. This is understanding that no amount of work, no amount of dedication, no amount of love can guarantee the outcome you want. The first scan comes back after 6 weeks. Dr. Reeves calls him into her office. The way she sits, the way she moves her pen across the desk, tells him that the news is not what they'd hoped for. The tumor has shrunk, but not as much as we'd like, Dr. Reeves says. We're looking at about 40% reduction. We were hoping for 60, 70%. This suggests that the chemo is working, but the tumor is more resistant than we anticipated. What does that mean? David asks. It means we have options. We can continue the current protocol, we can change the chemo regimen, or we can start talking about surgery. Which one works best? That depends on Eva. That depends on how she tolerates treatment. That depends on a lot of variables. David nods. He's learning to live with variables. He's learning to understand that the world doesn't offer certainties, only probabilities. That night, David sits on the fire escape of the apartment building and calls his ex-wife. The chemo isn't working as well as they'd hoped, he says without greeting. Catherine is silent for a long moment. Then, I'm coming. You don't need to. I'm coming. Tell me when. She arrives on a Tuesday with a man named Gregory, who has the kind of expensive casual look that comes from not having to think about money. They bring resources, a consultation with a specialist at Johns Hopkins, recommendations for second opinions, a lawyer, a willingness to absorb the financial burden of Eva's care. It's an offer wrapped in love. It's also an offer that would require David to step back, to let them take the lead, to admit that he's not enough. He sits in his apartment with Catherine and Gregory. Eva is at the hospital for another scan, and he listens to Catherine explain the benefits of Johns Hopkins, the better outcomes, the specialists, the resources. She's crying a little, the kind of tears that come from guilt and fear, and the understanding that she's missed the important parts. Gregory is talking about flights, about a penthouse apartment in Baltimore, about the possibility of Eva getting the best care available. She stays here, David says. With me. You can help, but she stays here. David, Catherine starts. That's the only option. He watches Catherine's face change. She's understanding something about him that she probably never understood before, that he's not going to be moved by money, by resources, by the promise of something better. That his daughter is his responsibility, fully and completely, and he doesn't share responsibility. Gregory is already calculating something in his head. Probably the optics of backing away, of allowing the abandoned father to keep the sick child. Probably understanding that this is a moment where he should step back and let the biological parent handle it. Catherine stays anyway. She gets a hotel room. She comes to the hospital. She brings food, sits in waiting rooms, says things like, "You're doing a great job," which David neither believes nor needs to hear. But he allows her presence because Eva's mother showing up is something, even if it's not everything. The second surgery recommendation comes in week 8. A different doctor now, a neurosurgeon named Patel who has performed 300 brain surgeries and has the kind of confidence that comes from understanding exactly what your hands can do. The tumor is in a sensitive location, Dr. Patel says, pulling up the MRI on his computer screen. It's near the cerebellum, which controls balance and coordination, but it's localized. I can remove 90+% of it. There are risks. There are always risks, but the risk of not doing surgery is higher. David asks the questions. He takes notes on a yellow legal pad. He doesn't cry. Crying is for later, for after Eva is asleep, for times when his body is alone and can afford to break. What's the recovery like? David asks. Could be a few weeks, could be a few months. Depends on how much swelling there is, how well her body tolerates the procedure. She might have some balance issues initially. Some kids experience temporary motor skill changes, but most of them recover fully. And if I don't do the surgery? Then the tumor continues to grow, and eventually it becomes inoperable, and then you run out of options. David nods. He understands. There's only one choice, really. There's been only one choice since the diagnosis. He just has to make the choice and live with it. The surgery is scheduled for a Tuesday. The night before, Eva asks him if she'll still be able to dance. Yes, David says, which is a lie he might have to live with. You will. He sits with her in her hospital bed. She's smaller than she was when this started, worn down by chemo, her body depleted by the work of fighting something she doesn't understand. I'm scared, Eva says. I know, David says. That's okay. You're allowed to be scared. Are you scared? David considers lying. He considers telling her that everything will be fine, that the doctors are very good, that there's nothing to worry about. He considers protecting her from the truth. Instead, he says, I'm terrified, but I'm your dad, so I get to be terrified and still help you be brave. That's how it works. Eva nods. She seems to understand that this is the most honest thing anyone has told her in weeks. The surgery takes 5 hours and 43 minutes. David sits in the waiting area with Catherine, and they don't speak because what is there to say? They are two people who loved each other once and chose not to anymore. now united only by the small human being who contains their genetic material and their entire collective hope. David reads the same magazine article 4 times. Catherine stares at the wall. Neither of them eats, though there's a cafeteria. Neither of them moves. They exist in a state of suspended animation, waiting for news that will either change everything or change nothing, depending on how you look at it. Dr. Patel appears in his surgical clothes at 4:47 p.m. His expression is neutral until he's close enough to speak softly. "It went well," he says. "We got 96%. There was some adhesion to the surrounding tissue, but we were able to separate it cleanly. Her vitals were stable throughout. She's going to wake up in about 20 minutes. She's going to have some swelling, some pain, but she's going to be okay." David feels something in his chest release. It doesn't feel like joy. It feels like reprieve. It feels like the first moment in 8 weeks where he can breathe properly. Eva wakes up confused and in pain, her head wrapped in bandages so thick that she looks like a different creature. But she's awake. She's alive. The monitors show stable vitals. The surgery worked. David holds her hand and tells her that she did it, that she's the bravest person he knows, that everything else comes later. He cries now, quietly, the kind of tears that come from relief so complete that it has to go somewhere. The recovery is measured in small victories. She holds down food on day 3. She opens her eyes without prompting on day 4. She stands up on day 5, leaning heavily on David's arm. She takes 3 steps on day 8. Catherine goes back to Portland after 2 weeks. Before she leaves, she tells David, "Thank you for not letting me take her." David doesn't respond. He's learned that some things don't need acknowledgement. Some things are just facts that 2 people understand and move forward from. By week 6, post-surgery, Ava is back at school part-time. Her balance is imperfect. The surgery has affected her coordination in ways that will take months to fully resolve. But she's moving. She's learning. She's beginning to understand, in the way that resilient children do, that the worst thing that can happen to you is not necessarily the end of your story. David returns to work. Marcus gives him back his position, no questions asked. The company has been paid for his absence by the universe itself, it seems. 3 new contracts came in while he was gone, which means there's more work than there are people to do it. Marcus puts David on the overtime rotation. He picks up extra jobs. He works weekends. He works nights. His checking account slowly transforms from a medical fund back into a savings account. He's still paying off the debt that will probably follow him for a decade. The insurance covered most of it, but there are still co-pays and deductibles and procedures that weren't covered. But Eva is alive. Eva is healing. Eva is beginning to ask for things again, to want things, to believe that the future exists. 18 months after the initial diagnosis, Eva asks if she can take dance lessons again. David signs her up at a studio 3 blocks from their apartment. The teacher is a woman named Miss Jennifer, who has worked with children long enough to understand what recovery looks like, to move Eva gently forward without pushing her past what her body can do. It's a Saturday morning in spring when David sits in the waiting room and watches his daughter through the glass window. She's moving to music, her coordination still imperfect from the surgery, her balance sometimes uncertain. But she's moving. She's alive. She's doing something that 7-year-olds are supposed to do. Another father sits down beside him. White man, expensive shoes, the kind of casual confidence that comes from the world being built for people like him. His son is in the other class. "Your daughter?" the man asks. "Yeah. She's beautiful and brave. You can see it." David doesn't know what to say. He's not used to people seeing his daughter as brave. He's not used to people acknowledging that what they've survived together is something worth acknowledging. "Thanks," he says. That night, Eva falls asleep early, exhausted from the lesson. David sits at the kitchen table with a glass of water and realizes that he's been holding his breath for 18 months straight. He breathes out slowly. His phone buzzes. A text from Marcus. "Heard Eva's back at dance. That's great, man." David types back a simple, "Thank you," and sets the phone down. He thinks about the people who have helped him. Marcus, who held his job. Patricia, who sat with him in the hallway. Dr. Reeves, who explained the science in a way he could understand. Dr. Patel, who removed 96% of a tumor from his daughter's brain. Miss Jennifer, who is teaching his daughter to move again. He thinks about Catherine, who wanted to take over and learn to step back. He thinks about the landlord who worked with him on rent during the worst months. He thinks about the hospital social worker who helped him understand financial assistance programs. He thinks about the stranger who gave him a parking validation one day when he couldn't afford the $3. He thinks about the fact that he did it alone, but not entirely alone. That survival is something that happens in the spaces between people, in the moments when strangers decide that your struggle matters enough to acknowledge, enough to help with, enough to not turn away from. Eva wakes up at midnight, disoriented, asking for water. David gets it for her. She drinks it and looks at him with the kind of clarity that children sometimes have in the dark hours, when the world is quieter and the truth feels safer to speak. "I'm glad you're my dad," she says. "I'm glad too," David says, and means it in a way that covers everything. The fear, the decisions, the nights he couldn't sleep, the moments when he had to choose whether to break or keep standing. The fact that his daughter is alive and whole and asking him for water in the middle of the night like a normal child, like everything is going to be okay. He carries her back to bed. He sits beside her until she sleeps. He watches her breathe, the way he did in the hospital, the way he learned to do during those weeks when breathing was something you had to check on, something you had to verify was still happening. Outside the window, the city moves on, indifferent to the small dramas of survival happening in individual apartments. But inside this room, David and Eva exist in a space that belongs entirely to them. A space built on decisions made alone, on love that outweighed every other consideration, on a black father's refusal to step back when his daughter needed him to stand firm, on the quiet understanding that some people don't get help, don't get resources, don't get safety nets. But some of those people show up anyway. Some of those people stand in hallways and open folders and decide that their daughter matters more than their fear. That's enough. That has to be enough. That is everything.